Good morning, Central Kentucky. This is Sandra Leslie White coming to you live from WJMM Studios here just outside Lexington, Kentucky, and shouting out to all of you listening in on 99.1 FM, life changing radio. Good morning, and those of you around the country, WJMM. And a special shout out to one of my Facebook followers this morning. Happy birthday to Bill Chris down there in Corpus Christi, Texas. Dr. Bill is quite a scholar. Been on my show, and he's just such a precious brother of mine in Christ. And happy birthday, Bill. Thinking about you this morning. And I think you would like this show particularly because it's all about the wind. And down there in Corpus Christi, let me tell you something. That is the second windiest city in the nation. Did you know that? At least it used to be. I looked that up years ago. Wall Street Journal had this story about the windiest city. I grew up there, as did Bill, our birthday boy today. And one of the reasons I left Corpus Christi, and this is a true story, if my parents were living, maybe my sister would remember this, but they would attest to the reason I left Corpus was because of the wind. Okay, yeah, the reason I left, I was sick of the hurricanes. I was sick of the wind. I was sick of bad hair days. I was just sick of the whole thing. And I've got this love-hate relationship with the wind. What about you? So today we're going to talk about wings of the wind. Did you know that the wind has wings? I did not know that. But Hosea's got something to say about the wings of the wind this morning as we go into Hosea 4:16 to 19, finishing up chapter 4 today, and looking if we've got an extra minute into Acts 2, 1 to 3. So there's two real different forms of wind in the scriptures, in the Old Testament to the New. So let's look into that this morning in the New American Standard Version. I am in Hosea 4:17 to 19. I think we started with 16 on my show yesterday about Israel being a stubborn heifer, but let's go on and talk about Ephraim, verse 17 to 19. Ephraim is joined to idols. Let him alone. Their liquor gone. They play the harlot continually. Their rulers dearly love shame. The wind wraps them in its wings, and they will be ashamed because of their sacrifices. Okay, if you're just tuning in, this is Sandra Leslie White. We're talking about wings of the wind. I don't know about you, but I did not know that the wind had wings. Did you? So apparently this is an important metaphor in Hosea. He ends this very powerful chapter 4, where the prophet Hosea and Yahweh are sort of interconnected in the voice, in who is actually speaking in chapter 4. But he shifts from chapter 1, talking to his prophet and commanding him to marry a prostitute. And then he shifts to chapter 2. He's talking to the prostitute Gomer, the wayward wife of Hosea. And then in chapter 3, he's talking back to Hosea again, saying, go after that wayward wife one more time. And then in chapter 4, we go from the micro relationships, these one-on-one relationships Yahweh has with his people, into this macro relationship, this macro perspective on the nation Israel. And so now we look at the end of chapter 4, and let's start looking at it a little more closely as we turn to Hosea 4:17. So in the previous show, in the previous verse, we talked about Israel being a stubborn heifer. How can the Lord now pasture them like a lamb in a large field? I think it's interesting that he makes a comparison between a stubborn heifer, which that's who they are. So I don't know if you've ever been around a stubborn heifer. I mean, that's not really my background. Cattle, I've been around horses, and young horses are just, to me, they can be stubborn, but just dangerous, So, but a stubborn heifer is one that is very difficult, from what I understand, to get to do anything you need it to do. To go into its chute, to get its vaccinations, to get it out of the field, into the pen. The heifers that are used in a lot of our rodeo events can be quite stubborn. But he calls them these heifers, and now he then goes to they're supposed to be like sheep, but how can he pasture them in a large field if they're acting like heifers? So then he says Ephraim. He uses the word Ephraim. Ephraim is joined to idols. Well, according to John Gill, my favorite commentator on Hosea, he says that is the 10 tribes of Israel, frequently so called Ephraim, after their separation from the rest, because Jeroboam was the king at the time, by whom the revolt was made, was of that tribe. So he was of the tribe of Ephraim. And because that tribe was the principal of them, and Samaria, the metropolis of their kingdom, was in it. And so the Targum here renders it, the house of Israel are joined to idols, to the calves at Dan and Bethel, to Baal and other idols they worshipped. The phrase expresses their strong affection for them, their constant worship of them, and their obstinate persisting therein, and the difficulty there was of bringing them off of it. They cleaved to their idols, were glued, as it were wedded unto them. There was no separating of them, as men are, who are addicted to the lusts of the flesh, to the mammon of unrighteousness, or to their own self-righteousness, or to any idol they set up in their hearts as such. Hence, it follows, let them alone. Okay, so that's Ephraim. That is one of the 10 tribes. It's essentially the heart of the rebellion in the northern kingdom at the time. That's the king of that time. Jeroboam came out of this tribe of Ephraim, and so now he says, since Israel is stubborn like a stubborn heifer and jumps down, Ephraim is joined to idols, and gives the command to the prophet, let him alone. So now he is talking, he goes from talking to Israel, Yahweh here, talking to Israel, and then he goes on to allow Hosea to talk to Israel. And now in verse 17, it seems, and even in 16, it seems that he's talking to Hosea. So again, this interconnectedness between Hosea and Yahweh is very, very clear, which is sort of an oxymoron. It's difficult to distinguish between the two voices, but it is clear that they are going in and out of one another's voice in the penning of this prophecy. So he's talking to his prophet and saying Ephraim is joined to idols. In other words, he's joined, he's wedded, he's in. It's not going, he's addicted, and I can't get Ephraim out. So in verse 17, he commands the prophet, let him alone. Now I think it's interesting that he said, let him, Ephraim, which comprises one of the 10 tribes, and specifically the tribe that the evil King Jeroboam came out of. So let him alone. He goes on to say, their liquor gone. They play the harlot continually. Their rulers dearly love shame. So it is interesting to me that he is talking about their liquor is now gone. So what's going on here? Their liquor is gone. They're looking at one of their, I guess, means of self-medication. They're in this horrific place of darkness. And if you have listened to any of the shows previously on Chapter 4, we've been in Chapter 4 for a while. You can look at those on my Facebook page, Sandra Leslie White. Ministries, or check out my podcast on Podbean, Lifting the Veil. But it looks as though they have simply lost all sense of their heritage in Yahweh. And they are drinking, it seems, to cover up, which is often our case. What are we covering up when our liquor becomes a part of our daily lives? What kind of pain are we anesthetizing there? What does that indicate? That their pain is being anesthetized, and now it is perhaps coming out of that state, but they still play the harlot continually. The rulers dearly love shame. So they've gone from, being ashamed of shame. They've gone from being Israel, but being God's people of a peculiar nation set apart for his purposes. And they slowly, it looks as if slowly became affected by the Canaanite gods. And as that slow slide began down the mountain, so to speak, they became more and more encaptured, influenced, under the spell of the harlotries of the Canaanite gods. And so now we understand that it looks really bad for Israel. It looks like they are done. The wedding to the false gods is completed. It's consummated. And he says, leave them alone. Their rulers dearly love shame. So now the wind wraps them in its wings, and they will be ashamed because of their sacrifices. Ooh, the wind wraps them in its wings. Okay, name of the show, Wind Wraps. Wings of the wind. Does it wrap you in its wings? Have you ever felt that way? It's kind of like that in a hurricane, isn't it? It seems that way. If you've ever been in one or around one, you don't know what's going on. You can't capture it. You can't predict it. It's difficult to know how to respond to it. Okay, so listen to what Gil says about this. That is, the wind in its wings hath bound up Ephraim, Israel, or the 10 tribes, compared to a heifer. Meaning that the wind of God's wrath and vengeance, or the enemy, the Assyrian, should come like a whirlwind and carry them swiftly, suddenly, and irresistibly out of their own land into a foreign country. The past tense for the future, as is commonly held in prophecy, because of the certainty of it. Israel hath bound up the wind in her wings, meaning they had labored in vain in their idolatrous worship, and it was all one, as if they should attempt to gather the wind. Listen to this. Gather the wind. Bind it up in the skirts of their garments. And when they open them, there is nothing to be found. So, we're looking at this mighty rushing wind, this violent wind that is going to come and capture Ephraim, the 10 tribes of Israel, capture them in its wings and carry them away. So, we're going to look and continue with this tomorrow as we look at another mighty rushing wind, as we look into Acts and begin to compare the two violent winds. One in the Old Testament, this violent wind that God will send over Ephraim, over the 10 tribes of the northern kingdom. And then there's going to be a violent rushing wind that he sends in the New Testament in the book of Acts. I will look very forward to discussing this with you tomorrow. God bless you today.